think by now it's pretty clear that I just don't take care of myself before shooting these videos, but what are you gonna do? What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. It's 2026. I thought this would be the year we start taking consistent content a little more serious. So I'm back, and today I want to talk about being a freelance filmmaker versus having a full-time job as a filmmaker. This is something I've been thinking a lot about recently because when I started my career in filmmaking, which is not too long ago now, a year or two ago, I started in freelance, and I was freelance up until this past year in 2025. I had the opportunity to take a full-time job with Bucket Squad, which is an apparel brand, and I got to learn what it was like to work as a full-time creative with a job and a paycheck and have to respond to people throughout the office and have a boss and work on things that weren't necessarily my idea or my choosing, but work on things for the whole as a company. Now, I kind of want to get into why I took on a full-time role as opposed to staying a freelance filmmaker. Now, I think I've mentioned this in a couple videos, but in 2025, I actually moved across the country to Los Angeles from Philadelphia. And in that move, there are a lot of moving parts, both personally and professionally. So when I got out to LA, I was freelance for a good while, and I found that it is expensive out here. So when the opportunity to take a full-time job came my way, I thought maybe I should give it some thought. Now, I took this job in particular because I would not take any full-time role just for consistent paychecks or money. I took this role because there was a level of freedom to it. I was able to plan out shoots. I was in charge of pre-production, production, post-production, and although I was normally working in a smaller team, I was able to gain experience shooting bigger campaigns for a brand that I thought was very cool and make a consistent income while doing all. Additionally, working with Bucket Squad allowed me to not take jobs I normally wouldn't want to take but would take just for the income, while also letting me only take freelance work that was beneficial to my career and to the growth of me as a person and a DP. So for these reasons, I took the job with Bucket Squad in 2025, and I really enjoyed it. Now, going into 2026, I am back to being full-time freelance, and I'm very excited about it, but I want to give you guys the pros and cons of either being a freelance filmmaker versus a full-time, getting a paycheck filmmaker who's working for a bigger organization. Now, I want to start with the full-time creative, someone who is receiving consistent paychecks from a company, whether it's a production company, whether it's some other creative brand company or apparel company like myself, someone who is receiving a consistent income and is an employee and has a 9-to-5 under some other company or person. Now, I've already mentioned it. Firstly, and most obviously, the biggest benefit of this is consistent pay. Not having to worry about the next job, where your next paycheck's coming from, whether you're gonna have a slow month or a busy month is a luxury I didn't know I would appreciate as much as I did. Having the peace of mind of knowing how much minimum you'd make per month before any extra stuff you were doing was really nice. It definitely allowed me to be very responsible with my money because I knew how much I should or shouldn't spend. Not that I don't do that on the regular, but knowing how much I should or shouldn't spend allowed me to invest in different gear and invest in different projects. Being an adult or teenager, whatever you are, it's really nice to have a set amount of money you know you're gonna have in your pocket every month, and you can figure out what to do with that. Now, my second pro to having a full-time job, and more specifically being a full-time creative DP kind of shooter, is the consistent projects to be working on. Now, I think as a DP, filmmaker, videographer, photographer even, any sort of artist, you need to be sharpening your sword consistently. The less you practice a skill, the more you're gonna lose it. So having consistent projects that are of a certain level makes it easy to stay sharp and to improve and to try something new every time you're going out there. Being forced to create a lot only allowed me to grow. I felt like I got quicker both on set and in post-production. I feel like my pre-production got better, and I feel like I overall had a better understanding of the entire process from a bird's eye view and understanding how to get from A to B and finish an entire campaign. For me, working with an apparel brand, I got worried that this could get very monotonous, but it actually allowed me to try various different things on set, whether it was using a new lens, a new lighting technique, a new location, or even just operating the camera differently than I normally would. I found that it pushed me to be more creative and to try new things, and it forced me to learn how to come up with new and fresh ideas while kind of shooting the same sort of thing each and every time. My last pro is the accountability and responsibility that is required of you as an employee working for a bigger company. Where I was working, I was expected to be in charge of pre-production, production, post-production, almost one-man banding these campaigns, and that required me to be on top of things. I couldn't spend a day slacking off, and I feel that opposed to the freelance world, there are days where as a freelancer, if I don't have a lot of work, I don't have much to edit, I can just kind of take a day to just be lazy, slack off, not get as much done as I'd like. But with the full-time job, you need to be on your toes a lot or you will lose that job. So for me, these are the three biggest benefits of having a full-time job. And now I want to take a look at the other side of the coin, all the cons of a full-time job. So for me, my biggest con of having a full-time job, and this can change per person. I mean, this whole list can change per person and their experience and their role and whatever. But my biggest con with my full-time job was that I was not able to pick and choose the projects I was working on. As a freelancer, obviously you can turn down a job whether the pay is low or you just don't really care about what you're working on or some other various reason. But when you're working a full-time job and you're being paid each and every week to create something for this company, this brand, whoever it is, you can't turn down something because you think, it's not a great idea, or I don't really like the clothing this time, or you know what, the product's not that great, I don't really want to make something for it. It's not how it works. You are expected to always shoot what they ask of you, and that's just how it goes. Now, this isn't the biggest con in the world for me, but there were obviously moments where there was a certain drop, a certain product that we were releasing and needed to shoot for, and I just wasn't super passionate about what we were doing, the idea behind it, and part of that can come down to me and like, did I get creative enough with it? Probably not, but I couldn't say no. I couldn't try to change things last minute. That's not how it works. You know, we need to make sure we are providing for the people who are paying us, you know, whether you're freelance or in a full-time job. And in this case, you know, as an employee, I was expected to create something for this brand. And if they saw they needed something to be created this way and I disagreed, I kind of just had to live with that and move on. So moving on to con numero dos, you don't have as much schedule freedom. And I know that's super obvious, but I am now learning to really appreciate the fact that I can make my own schedule day in and day out. In my experience, Monday through Friday, I was required to be working 9 to 5, sometimes outside of that range, and that can eat up your day occasionally. And I get that's like the standard American workday, but going from freelance to a full-time job, I really, really felt that. I felt that I didn't control as much of my day. I definitely was more invested into work than what I would normally be more passionate about, and that's just how it goes. That might not be a con for some people. Some people love to be pointed in a direction and told what to do each day, but for me, personally, how I operate, I feel like I'm able to set my own schedule very well, and having to abide by someone else's schedule always feels a little restraining to me. So that's my second con with this. My third and final con for the full-time employee is that comfort can sometimes stall growth. And what do I mean by this? I think that after a while, especially being in a full-time job where you do have the comfort of a full-time salary or part-time salary or at least a bi-weekly paycheck, it's easy to fall into a place where you don't feel like you need to push yourself. And I do think I did a pretty decent job of pushing myself the entire time I had a full-time job, but there were definitely cases where I would take my foot off the pedal a little bit. I wasn't pushing myself as much as maybe I should to grow and learn new things. And for me, I don't want to stop growing. And I think for me as a DP, there's still so much I need to learn, and I want to keep learning those things, keep pushing myself without someone else doing it to learn new things, you know? And I think even if someone's not always pushing me to learn, there's something to be learned, new techniques, new cameras even. I don't want to stop growing because I feel comfortable with where I'm at. And I think that's more down to the person than maybe the job. I just think having a full-time job makes it easier to fall into a place of comfort where you feel like maybe you don't need to grow as much as you really do. So those ideas kind of cover what I think about having a full-time job as a creative. And this is, you know, all purely based on my experience. Of course, someone else might completely disagree with this list, but now I want to talk about being a freelance filmmaker and my thoughts on the benefits and negatives of the freelance world. Off the rip, expect this to be slightly biased. I was a freelance filmmaker first, then I had a full-time job, now I'm back to being a freelance filmmaker. But either way, I want to be fair, so let's jump into this list. Now this pro is kind of the same thing I said earlier with a full-time job, but the inverse of it. The best part of being a freelance filmmaker is the freedom you have in your schedule. And no, I don't mean the freedom as in I can go slack off whenever I want or I can blow off work. Being my own boss, I'm able to get as much done as possible while also being super invested in everything throughout my day. For instance, I'll have some days dedicated to making YouTube videos or making content for Instagram. I'll have some days dedicated to just editing all day. Some will be a combination of all that, but the best part for me is that I get to set that schedule. I get to decide how to use my time the best possible way. Or for instance, if friends want to hang out or go on a trip for a day or there's a family emergency flexibility. I don't need to worry about work getting in the way. I can shift my schedule around to make room for certain things, you know, time abiding, of course. I'm not gonna just go on a week-long trip and blow off work just because I want to and can. Obviously, there is some responsibility in that, which is why I think there's more responsibility involved in the full-time job. But getting back to this, I think having the freedom of making your own schedule as a freelancer is one of the best parts of the job. The second best part of being a freelance filmmaker is project choice. Now, I don't just mean taking projects that pay the most or projects that are the coolest, but I mean the actual variance of the projects you can take. For instance, one week I can go out and shoot sports or shoot a sports commercial, and the next week I can go shoot chess or a chess commercial. And it's two different things, and yes, I'm still holding a camera, but it feels so different. And to me, it's like having a different job all the time and being able to see all these different walks of life. One of my favorite parts about being a filmmaker is all the different types of people I get to meet, all the different types of jobs I get to see, all these other parts of life that I normally wouldn't experience, I get to experience because I'm capturing it with my camera. Having that project variance and being able to choose what projects you do and do not take just adds another level of freedom to it, to be honest, and it just keeps things fresh and it never gets monotonous like a full-time job might. So for that reason, I really love the fact that I can choose what projects I do and do not take. My final benefit or positive or pro to being a freelance filmmaker is the income potential, which might sound kind of odd, but as much as this can be a con, and I will talk about this in the con section, but I think it's really cool how you don't have a cap to what you can make. Now, in my opinion, money shouldn't be something that necessarily is the main driver for people. But the idea that if you get better at what you do, if you get better work, you start putting out better work, you get hired for higher level things, you will start making more money. And it's really cool that you can increase your income levels month to month or year to year, whatever it may be, based on how you're doing in your job. And I think that forces people to want to work harder, be more creative, try new things. And I think that's something that's really awesome about being freelance, whereas in a full-time job, you have a salary cap. And that's okay, you might get a bonus at the end of the year. There might be other ways to make some extra money, but really you stay within that money boundary. And I think that might have an effect on how comfortable you are in the job. It might stop you from pushing yourself. And I think freelance has a way where it doesn't do that. Now let's talk about the cons of being a freelance filmmaker. And the first one, of course, has to be income inconsistency. Now, I'll have months where I think I'm gonna be rich. I should go buy a new camera. I should buy an Ari. What else can I do with a bunch of money? But the point is that I'll have months where I think I'm making a ton of money and that the money will never end. I'm just gonna keep getting paid more and more. And then the very next month, I'll make $0. And that's just how it works. It's tough mentally to have to go through these ebbs and flows of the freelance world, but I also think it can help someone mature and learn how to balance money, but it's tough. And I still struggle with it. I've struggled with it bad in the past. You get to a point where you're like, I'll take any job, and that's just how it goes. But that's definitely a con about being in the freelance world, is that you don't have that security of a consistent income. And it takes time to adjust to that. And honestly, I still have to adjust day in and day out to being like, I'm either making a ton of money or I'm making no money, or somewhere in between. But the inconsistency of the money does make things harder at times. Now, my second con of being a freelance filmmaker is that you're gonna have to learn how to wear every hat. You need to learn how to be a small business owner. You need to learn how to manage your money. You need to learn how to find work. You need to learn how to network with other people. It's a lot of stuff. And in all honesty, it can be super overwhelming. I know I get overwhelmed by it all the time, especially because I don't love networking. I don't love having to reach out to people, but that's just part of the job. And it will be hard, and that's okay. You can learn and grow. I'm definitely still learning and growing. I still have so much to learn and grow from, but you need to learn how to do various different things and have various different skills when managing yourself as a small business or as an individual working for themselves. My last and final con of freelance is something that might be specific to my experience, can change based on the person and what they do. But a con for me is having to invest in your own gear as a filmmaker. It costs a lot of money to invest in a nice camera, a nice microphone, a nice tripod, a nice whatever you might need. Whereas in a full-time job, that might be provided for you. I'm not saying it's gonna be provided for someone in every case. They might get to a full-time job where they have to have their own stuff. But in my case, and in cases I've seen, people are provided with some sort of level of equipment, which means you don't have to spend money out of your own pocket to go buy that stuff. But now, as a freelance filmmaker, I own my own tripod, my own lights, my own microphone, my own camera, all this stuff that adds up to be a lot of money, and still, even now, I'm like, damn, I could use one or two more pieces of gear, which is crazy to think about. So my last and final con in being a freelance filmmaker is that you need to invest in yourself and in your own gear. So this pretty much covers my list for the benefits and negatives of either having a full-time job as a creative or being a freelance filmmaker, photographer, whatever it may be. Let me know if you've experienced any of this. These two different paths have been something I've considered and thought about a lot in 2025 and 2026. And I think for different people, different options work better. If you're someone who is okay with being guided and just wants a safe job to save money, whatever, the full-time route might be for you. But if you're someone who wants to be creative, wants to have freedom, wants to do their own thing, then doing the freelance thing is definitely gonna be you. Each has its own struggle, each has its own positive, but now that I've seen both sides of the coin, I feel like I wanted to share it for other people to hear some thoughts on and potentially take into account when they're deciding which route they want to take. So that's been all from me, honestly. I'm just happy to be making some videos again. I'm trying to do it consistently this year. I've been saying that every video. I think I'm gonna keep saying it, even if I'm not consistent. Thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out. If you stayed to the end, comment, go Birds. Anyway, I don't know. Peace. Now I wanna start with the full-time creative, someone who is